Hunger isn't just the feeling of an empty stomach. It's when your body, desperate for fuel, begins to consume itself, breaking down muscle and tissue piece by piece. It's when tree bark looks like a meal, and a large moth seems like a rare delicacy. Two Americans didn't read about this in books or hear it in stories. They lived it, in their own skin, in the unforgiving wilds of Australia's Kimberley region. A place where nature doesn't just challenge intruders, it crushes them without mercy. On May 1st, a farmer named Peter Lacey was driving along an old dirt road when two figures at the roadside caught his eye. What he saw shook even this hardened man of the outback. Two human forms so thin and wasted they looked more like walking skeletons than living beings. They were 18-year-old Will Chaffee and 33-year-old reptile researcher Jeff Cunningham. For more than 2 months they had fought to survive, losing nearly a third of their body weight while walking close to 250 kilometers through one of the harshest landscapes on Earth. Kimberley, in northwestern Australia, is a land of brutal contrasts, where red sandstone plateaus clash with thick jungle, and lush greenery suddenly gives way to scorched desert. In the wet season, the entire region becomes a suffocating trap. Rivers swell into muddy torrents patrolled by saltwater crocodiles as long as 7 meters. Wild boars carve tunnels through dense thickets, while venomous spiders and snakes wait silently for the careless traveler. It's a land that shows no pity and gives no second chances to the weak. Will had come here as a lost teenager desperate to escape his problems. Back home in New England's elite schools, his life had spiraled downward. A bicycle crash left him with a concussion that shattered his ability to concentrate. His grades collapsed, clashes with the administration nearly got him expelled, and rejections from top universities crushed what little confidence he had left. For Will, Australia wasn't an adventure, it was an escape, a chance to start over far from his failures. It was there, in a Queensland reserve, that he met Jeff Cunningham, a meeting that changed the course of his life forever. Jeff, a seasoned herpetologist devoted to studying snakes and lizards, possessed what Will lacked: a clear purpose and an unshakable passion for the wild. Jeff knew Kimberley well and dreamed of finding the elusive rough-scaled python, a species once thought extinct until rediscovered in the remote mountains during the 1970s. Funding from Australian Geographic turned that dream into a tangible expedition. And by late February of 1990, the two men made their decision. They would set out. The wet season usually kept even the boldest travelers away. Flooded roads, constant storms, an entire region cut off from the outside world. But Jeff insisted this was the perfect time. Reptiles were more active, and their chances of spotting the rare snake were far greater. Their planned route bordered on madness. From the Drysdale River, across Prince Regent National Park, all the way to King Cascade Falls. No European had ever completed this trek entirely on foot. They packed 6 weeks' worth of supplies: dehydrated food, fishing gear, and the bare minimum of survival equipment. On paper, it looked just enough to succeed. One morning, a small mail plane lifted off from the airstrip in Kununurra. Inside sat 2 Americans with heavy backpacks strapped to their shoulders. The pilot glanced down at the endless red plains, split by deep gorges, and shook his head. When he learned their destination, he couldn't hold back and muttered the same words again and again: crazy, absolutely crazy. And as Will gazed out the window at the rugged, broken wilderness from above, even he began to feel the weight of what they had gotten themselves into. The plane touched down on a narrow dirt strip near the Drysdale River. When the engine went silent and the vast stillness closed in around them, Will and Jeff hauled their packs off the plane, said goodbye to the pilot, and suddenly found themselves alone, surrounded by red cliffs and eucalyptus groves in the heart of the outback. Ahead of them stretched weeks of trekking through one of the most remote places on Earth, with the nearest town hundreds of kilometers away. As the hum of the plane faded into the sky, they realized the truth. There was no turning back. All they had was 6 weeks' worth of supplies, and a plan that was little more than a rough sketch. Neither of them could have guessed that this expedition would soon turn into a battle between life and death, one that would forever change how they saw their own limits. The first days lulled them into a false sense of safety. They followed ancient trails along the river, enjoying the cool air of the mornings. until the sun rose higher and turned the atmosphere into a scorching furnace. Their backpacks pressed down on their shoulders, each weighing around 55 pounds. Inside were 6 weeks of food, sleeping bags, a small tent, fishing gear, and the bare minimum for survival. The roles between them fell into place naturally. Jeff, who knew the region well, took charge of the route, reading the map, using the compass, deciding when to move on. Will, younger and physically resilient, handled the heavy chores. Setting up camp, gathering firewood, starting fires, and searching for water. The 15-year age gap was obvious, but it didn't yet create tension between them. By the second day, however, the wet season revealed its true nature. Every afternoon the sky turned black, the air thickened into a suffocating weight, and then the rains came, sudden and violent. Within minutes, dry streambeds became raging torrents, and the trails dissolved into slippery trenches of mud that made every step treacherous. Food quickly became a problem. Breakfast was just a handful of muesli with powdered milk, and dinner a packet of meat and beans. Lunch, if it happened, depended on luck. Will tried fishing, but the rain-swollen waters were murky, and the fish rarely bit. An old field guide to edible plants turned out to be useless. In the wet season, most fruits were unripe or simply gone. By the end of the first week, both men noticed their clothes hanging looser. Belts had to be tightened. The relentless heat forced them to drink huge amounts of water, but the calories they were taking in were dangerously low. Will did the math. With their heavy packs, they were burning nearly 4,000 calories a day, but consuming barely 1,500. The numbers were merciless. 2 weeks in, the landscape changed again. Open plains gave way to dense tropical jungle along the Prince Regent River. Towering eucalyptus trees, some rising more than 160 feet high, created a green tunnel overhead, and the humidity was so intense it felt like you could reach out and touch the air itself. It was here that their nightly search for the rare rough-scaled python began. After dinner, they strapped on headlamps and wandered through the thick jungle, peering into cracks in the rocks and scanning the branches above. Jeff explained that in darkness, the snakes could be spotted by the reflection of their eyes. But weeks of searching brought nothing. Instead of the elusive species, they found only ordinary pythons and the occasional venomous snake, which they quickly avoided. By the end of the third week, the toll of exhaustion could no longer be hidden. Will noticed his face growing gaunt, his ribs now sharply visible beneath his skin. Jeff had also lost a worrying amount of weight, though he tried not to show weakness. Their daily marches shrank from 15 kilometers to barely 10. Their bodies simply couldn't manage more. Tempers began to fray. Small irritations, clouds of mosquitoes, damp clothing, tasteless meals, now sparked bursts of anger. Jeff grew withdrawn, while Will became short-tempered. More and more, they walked in silence, conserving their energy and avoiding conflict. On the 42nd day of their trek, the sound of rushing water rumbled ahead. Forcing their way through the undergrowth, they froze at the sight before them. King Cascade Falls, plunging from a height of 40 meters into a wide lagoon, framed by red cliffs and mangrove forests. After so many suffocating weeks in the jungle, the scene felt like paradise. Will and Jeff stood on the shore, barely able to believe their eyes. 250 kilometers of wilderness, 6 weeks of struggle, a quarter of their body weight lost, and now it was finally behind them. Within a few days, the Kimberley explorer was supposed to arrive, ready to take them back to civilization. Jeff even joked that all they had to do now was put on sunglasses and wait. The first days at their camp near the falls passed in relative ease. They settled into a small cave above the cascade, sheltered from the rain and overlooking the lagoon. Their food supplies were running out, but they weren't worried. The boat was due to arrive on April 23rd with tourists and plenty of provisions. But the problems began by the third day of waiting. First, the coffee was gone. Then the powdered milk. Soon after, the rice. By April 18th, only a few packets of dehydrated meat remained. Will tried to make up for the shortage by fishing, but soon made a chilling discovery. The lagoon was home to massive saltwater crocodiles. Jeff told him a haunting story that had happened here just 2 years earlier. A 4-meter crocodile had suddenly attacked an American tourist swimming in the lagoon. Her body was never recovered. From then on, every time Will approached the water with his line, it felt like playing Russian roulette. He would perch on the edge of a rock, constantly glancing around for the faintest sign of movement beneath the surface. Every ripple made his heart race. And on April 19th, his worst fear came true. While fishing, he spotted something unusual in the water. At first it looked like a floating log, drifting slowly against the current. But within moments, he realized the truth. A crocodile, nearly 15 feet long, was gliding straight toward him. Will locked eyes with the predator's yellow gaze, its gaping jaws and powerful tail cutting through the water. The reptile closed the distance to within 10 meters and clearly noticed him. Then, from above, Jeff's voice rang out, "Crocodile!" In an instant, the beast vanished beneath the surface, leaving only ripples behind. From that ill-fated day, a rift opened between them. Will spent hours risking his life at the water's edge, trying to fish, while Jeff refused to go near the lagoon, claiming he didn't know how to handle a rod. The tension built for weeks until it finally exploded on April 20th. That morning, Will managed to land a large fish, enough to feed them both. But when he handed the rod to Jeff, a clumsy slip snapped it in two. For Will, it was a disaster. Their only reliable tool for getting food was now useless. He erupted in rage, accusing Jeff of weakness and irresponsibility. Jeff snapped back, insisting he was doing everything he could. Both men were so starved and on edge that the smallest spark could ignite a full-blown fight. That night, still fuming, Will dragged his sleeping bag out of the cave and lay under the open sky. For the first time in the expedition, they slept apart. April 23rd was supposed to bring salvation, the Kimberley explorer boat. At sunrise, they sat on the riverbank and waited until nightfall, their eyes never leaving the water. Every splash seemed like the hum of an engine, every bird call like the signal of an approaching boat. But the day ended, and the river remained empty. That evening, for the first time, they admitted out loud what they both feared. Rescue might never come. Jeff suggested that powerful cyclones could have blocked river traffic. Will, hearing this, thought grimly, "What if we're stuck here forever?" By April 25th, the situation had reached breaking point. The last of their food was gone. Their meals now consisted of wild figs and water lettuce, plants with almost no real nutrition. Will tried fishing barehanded with just a line, but whatever he caught was barely enough for a few bites. That's when Jeff explained something known as rabbit starvation or protein starvation. When the body consumes only protein, without fats or carbohydrates, it begins breaking down its own muscles to survive. Day by day, they grew weaker. Worse than the physical collapse was the psychological weight. Will began keeping a farewell journal, writing messages to his parents, his brothers, and his girlfriend. He confessed his love, begged them not to blame themselves for his likely death, and poured his last strength into those words. In moments of despair, he asked himself, "How did I end up here? Just a year ago, I was an ordinary kid in Massachusetts, and now I'm dying in the heart of Australia." On April 28th, after 5 empty days of waiting, they made the hardest decision of their lives. Staying at the waterfall meant certain death, no food, no strength, no rescue. Their only chance was a desperate trek on foot toward Mount Elizabeth Station, marked with a red circle on their battered old map. The farm lay roughly 250 kilometers away, across uncharted land. Their only guide was a map from the 1960s that showed a dirt road leading there, but no one knew if the road still existed or if it could be crossed at all. They spent the entire day preparing for the march. Everything unnecessary was left behind. The tent, spare clothes, even books. In their packs remained only sleeping bags, the last drops of water, and the fragile hope of finding food along the way. The night before, Will had caught a few catfish, and those small fish became their only rations for the grueling journey ahead. On the morning of April 29th, they left King Cascade Falls behind. Will glanced back at the lagoon where they had endured 2 grueling weeks and felt a hollow ache in his chest. Deep down, he knew he would never set foot there again. Ahead stretched an endless desert plain, where every step could prove fatal. The first days of their march were consumed with the desperate search for the old dirt road. They pushed steadily south, guided only by a compass and a battered map from the 1960s. The landscape shifted once more. The damp jungle vanished, replaced by barren plateaus dotted with stunted eucalyptus trees and the razor-sharp spikes of spinifex grass. Then, on May 1st, the fourth day of their trek, came the breakthrough they had been hoping for. Faint tire tracks appeared on the hardened earth. The road was long abandoned, but it was still a road. It meant only one thing. Vehicles had once passed here, and with that, the possibility of rescue became real. That same day, fate delivered them an even greater surprise. Will spotted a narrow path branching off from the track. Following it, he stumbled upon a deserted cattle-droving camp, a few crumbling structures and 2 rusted shipping containers. The first held nothing but trash, but inside the second lay a treasure, sacks of flour, nearly 20 kilograms of it. Mixing flour with water, they baked crude flatbreads over a fire. That rough bread became the most delicious meal of their entire ordeal. It gave them strength, and, more importantly, it rekindled their hope. Survival was still within reach. With fresh provisions in their packs, they returned to the old road and pressed on. Each day that followed was a punishing trial. 15 hours under the scorching sun, brief rests in the meager shade of withered trees, and restless nights on the bare ground. Their bodies were burning out, but their goal was finally within sight. By May 4th, however, their reserves were gone. On the 7th day of marching, they managed no more than 20 kilometers instead of the 40 they had planned. The last of the flour was finished. Around noon, Will's legs began to betray him. Each step required sheer force of will, his vision clouded with dark spots. Jeff staggered behind, leaning heavily on a makeshift staff. His face had turned ashen, his lips cracked and bleeding, but he kept forcing himself forward, knowing that stopping meant death. By mid-afternoon, Will collapsed to his knees and couldn't rise again. Jeff pulled him up, but after only a few steps, Will fell once more. Both men knew the truth. They could go no farther. 60 days in the wilderness, the loss of a third of their body weight, and a week of brutal desert marching had finally broken them. Will lay sprawled in the middle of the road, staring up at the endless sky. His thoughts tangled and dissolved into hallucinations. He saw his parents' faces, heard his mother's voice. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Jeff sank down beside him, gasping for breath. 2 Americans who had set out chasing discovery now lay dying beneath the merciless sun of the Kimberley. And then the impossible happened. Out of the silence came a sound they hadn't heard in over 2 months. The low growl of an engine. At first, they thought it was another hallucination, but the noise grew louder. A plume of dust rose on the horizon. Slowly, an old Jeep rumbled into view. Behind the wheel sat a middle-aged man, a dog beside him. It was Peter Lacey, the owner of Mount Elizabeth Station. The farmer slammed on the brakes and jumped out of his Jeep. Before him lay a harrowing sight. 2 men who looked more like shadows of themselves, their eyes sunken deep, their clothes hanging loose on withered frames. With great effort, Will whispered that they were just tourists, lost in the national park. Lacey shook his head. He hadn't expected to see another soul out here until the start of the dry season. When Will asked how far it was to the station, the farmer answered, 20 kilometers. For men in their condition, it was impossible. Then came the words that gave them hope. "I'm headed there myself. I'll take you." Climbing into the Jeep was agony. Their bodies barely responded. But after 40 minutes of driving, they reached Mount Elizabeth Station. The people who came out to greet them were stunned. One worker, staring at Will's skeletal figure, muttered under his breath, "Kid, you need meat. Fast." They were given a room, a shower, and food. Both men devoured their meals with desperate hunger until their stomachs rebelled. Yet they couldn't stop. After 60 days of relentless starvation, their bodies demanded fuel. The most emotional moment came when Will was finally able to call home. The station had only one phone booth, the sole link to the outside world. With trembling hands, he dialed his parents' number. The moment he heard his mother's voice, He broke down in tears. For over 2 months, his family had heard nothing. They had already contacted the embassy, bracing themselves for the worst. To them, his call was nothing short of a miracle. Back in 1990, the story of Chaffee and Jeff Cunningham never made the headlines. Their survival was not the result of a search and rescue mission, but of a chance encounter with a farmer. It only became widely known 19 years later, when Will published his account in a book. It took months for his body to recover. He had lost a third of his weight, but suffered no lasting physical damage. The psychological scars, however, were much deeper. Returning to the U.S., Will was no longer the same. The ordeal had reshaped his entire outlook. University struggles that once felt insurmountable now seemed trivial. By 2008, he was living in Massachusetts with his wife and children, still in close contact with Jeff, their friendship forged in the crucible of survival. What he valued most were life's simplest joys: a hot shower, a family dinner, the quiet after a long day. He returned to Australia several times, even flying by helicopter over King Cascade Falls. In interviews, Will admitted that the wilderness had stripped him of his illusions, but in exchange, it had given him true strength of character. Today, their story remains a reminder of how thin the line can be between adventure and disaster. The Kimberley still lures adventurers, though modern gear and communications make journeys safer than before. But anyone who sets foot there should remember the tale of 2 Americans who survived thanks to grit, friendship, and a sack of flour stumbled upon in the wild. And so ended one of the most astonishing survival stories ever told. It proves that human endurance knows no bounds when life itself is on the line. Will and Jeff showed that even in the bleakest situations, there's always a chance to make it through. Think about it. If the farmer had taken a different road that day, the story might have ended in tragedy. But sometimes fate intervenes at the very moment it's needed most, offering a second chance. Would you be able to endure something like this? Share in the comments which part of this story struck you the most. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. There are plenty more incredible tales of human resilience and unbelievable adventures ahead.